Hey, this time we will build a simple landing page from scratch, which will have a navigation with a couple of links, hero element with call to action button and image. Below we'll add some content and newsletter form to collect emails, and a simple footer with a few social media links. If you're new to Ycode, you will first notice the blank canvas. This is the area where we'll place the elements and build your page. On the left sidebar, you will see layers and elements that represent the structure of your website. On the right sidebar, you will see design properties and settings for the selected element. Let's start by creating hero section. In the layers, I will add structure element section with container inside. Container will help us keep content in the center of the page. Inside the container, I'll place rows. The first row we'll use for heading, paragraph, and call to action button, and the second row will place the image. So on the first row, named block, let's add heading element inside. I will update the text. We can now adjust typography settings in the right sidebar. I'll set letter spacing to tight and line height to tight as well. I'll make alignment center, and now below the heading, I'll add a paragraph. Double click to edit. Let's adjust alignment to center, line height to snug. We'll set size to 2XL or 24 pixels. So we can either choose the values from here or type the value you want. I'll set the weight to medium and color gray 500 from the presets. You might want to update the gap between those two elements. So let's first select the block, which is the parent element of those two text elements, and in design for layout display, let's set flex. This automatically displays elements horizontally, but we want to make direction vertical. Let's also adjust the gap. I will set it to 12 pixels. Let's go back to the paragraph and make it into 2 lines. So there are 2 ways to do it. Double clicking on the paragraph, hitting enter in the keyboard and making break line, or for the paragraph going into design properties, sizing, and setting the width of maximum, let's say 400 pixels. Now we have to go back to the parent element block, and where we adjusted the direction gap, we want to align elements center. Let's now add a button. So you can either click, it will be added inside the block, or you can drag it and place it below the paragraph. I'll adjust the text now. For the button element, let's now adjust the padding. Padding is the inner space of the element, and margin is the outside spacing. So we can hold Shift in the keyboard and drag these lines to adjust padding at once, or you can hold Option, which allows you to adjust opposite values. So I will set 10 pixel on the top and bottom, and 22 pixel on the left and right. In typography, I'll set size to base 16 pixels, weight to medium, then background color to blue from presets, and we'll also adjust border radius to fully rounded. If you want to access button settings, you can do that in the right sidebar, tab settings. Here you will find the link where you can set link onto this element. So the first row is looking pretty good. We can now collapse this layer, and inside the second block, let's place an image. So what we first might want to do is to adjust the gap. So on rows element, the parent element of these two rows, back to settings, layout, let's set gap to 72. I will now select the image, we'll go into border and adjust radius. We'll set 3XL, 24 pixels. And now in right sidebar, we can adjust image itself. I'll choose it from the file manager. I already had uploaded image from the Unsplash. You can also use Unsplash integration. I'll just take it from here. In right sidebar, you'll find all the properties for the image, alt text for image description, fixed sizing, behavior for lazy loading. Let's now go back on section element. In design, we can adjust spacing for the section. By default, every section has 80 pixels on top and bottom for padding. I will hold options and drag it to 100. We'll collapse section layer for now, and we'll double click to rename it. Hero. Let's now go to navigation. I'll add a new section and container inside. We'll move the section above hero element. Inside container, let's add block and text element. I'll use text element for my logo. I'll just type website. We'll adjust size to LG 18 pixels and weight to semi-bold. Let's now add block element after text element here. Inside this block, we'll place navigation links. Elements, text link. That's right. About. And now adjust its size. Base. I'll remove the stroke. We'll set color to gray. Maybe gray 500. And weight medium. Let's use right click to add few more, or Command D to duplicate. For documentation and for contact. So the first thing is that we want to place these links over here. So again, on the parent element that holds text element and this block, we go to design, layout, display, flex. This time, direction is horizontal. Let's align center and justify those two items between. Looks good. The next thing we want to do is to adjust gap between the links. So on the element, block the parent element of all these links. Again, the layout, display, flex, and gap 40 pixels. Let's now select section element and adjust padding for it. I'll set 40 pixels top and 40 pixels bottom. We can again collapse section layer. We'll rename it to navigation. And in the settings, I'll select tag nav. Let's now see how everything looks on different breakpoints. To access breakpoints, you'll find options here that by default is all screens. Let's select MD screens, which is tablets, can see that the canvas gets smaller in width. Everything looks pretty good. Let's now check SM screens for mobiles. And we can see that the links are a bit close to the title. So for this time, let's just select the block that is holding all the links, and in design settings, let's set layout to display none. This means that all the links will be hidden on this breakpoint, and everything that is above will still be visible. Let's now get to the content. I'll collapse navigation and we'll add new section. Container inside. This time for container, the maximum width of container will be LG. Inside container, we'll place rows. In the first row, I'll add heading. We'll go into settings for heading and set tag to H2, since we already used H1 in the main title. We can now adjust the text. Its design. We'll set letter spacing to tight and line height to tight as well. And now for the second row, I'll get rid of it. And inside rows, I'll add grid. We'll place two paragraphs next to each other into two columns, so we only need two of blocks. Let's get rid of these two. Inside, let's place paragraph, updated size, weight, also color. I'll make it Excel. I'll duplicate this paragraph and move it into other column. We'll adjust gap between those two columns on grid element. You now see that we have two columns here, and gap will make it 40 pixels. And now on the rows element, I'll adjust gap between the first row that is holding our heading element, the second row that is grid. We'll make 56 pixels. Looks good. Let's now check how it looks on the breakpoint. Empty screens. You can see that these two paragraphs are getting too close and it might be hard to read. I'll set columns to 1. We'll decrease the gap to 20 pixels. And on the rows element, I'll also make it a smaller gap to 32 pixels. This will also look the same in SM screens as it inherits values from MD. This title is looking a little too big. Let's make it to 3XL. And let's go back to all screens. We can now collapse this section. I'll rename it to content. And we can now get to the most interesting part, collecting emails. Let's build newsletter section. I'll add section element again, div container inside. For this container, we'll use LG maximum width, just like we did for the content. We'll place block inside. I'll rename it to card. Inside, we'll place grid, and we'll keep two columns. Let's first go to card element. Let's add background color. I'll use same blue as we used for the button. and we'll just decrease opacity to 10%. We'll also make borders radius to 24 pixels as we did for the image, and adjust spacing to 64 pixels, padding on all sides. Inside first column of the grid, I'll place heading element. We'll select tag h2. By double clicking, we'll update heading text. And in design properties, we'll set size to 4XL, letter spacing to tight, and line height to collapsed. Inside second column, I'll place form element. We'll choose type data and hit add. Inside the form, let's place an input and a button. On the form element, let's set direction to horizontal and give it a gap of 12 pixels. We can now adjust input design. I'll make it fully rounded, and we'll get rid of the border. I'll also set bigger padding on the sides and on the top and bottom as well. For the button, we can grab this button style by right-clicking and copying a style, or we can create a layer style for that. Layer style helps you to keep design consistent across the whole project. So if you go to the design tab, you will see layer styles. By default, there are no layer styles in the project, so let's create a new one. Make sure your button element is active. Let's create new. I'll name it primary button and hit save. Now if we go back to the form, on button element, we can select the primary button layer style we just created. Let's now update the button text. Alright, subscribe. For the input, we can also adjust placeholder in the settings, placeholder, email address. Now let's get to the form setup. There are two ways to do it. The first one is to create collection in Ycode and store all the emails here. Second one is to use integration like MailChimp or MailerLite and connect it to get all their emails to email service provider. For this case, let's create a collection and store emails straight in Ycode. So the first thing we want to do is to create a collection. You will find it in the left sidebar. I'll hit plus, new, we'll name it subscribers. We'll now create a new field. We'll name it email and choose the type email. Create a new field. Now back to canvas. In data form, let's go to settings, form settings, and choose the source, collections, subscribers. Now let's click on the input and match it with the field we want to store the data. In the settings, you'll find element, field, email. This is the email field we created in subscribers collection. Now on button element, in the settings, let's give button an ID. I'll name it button subscribe. This way we can identify it when creating a workflow. You will find workflows in the left sidebar. Workflows will help you to make actions on your website, to submit a form, show or hide elements, send an email, and different more. There are two types, page and global. Page workflows will apply on the page, in this case, home page. You can select pages here, and global ones will apply to all the pages that using the same ID for the element. A good example would be navigation element that is being used throughout the pages, or newsletter subscribe in the footer that is also being used across the whole website. Let's now create a global workflow. I'll name it form subscribe. We'll add an event, elements, clicked on element. I will now find button subscribe that we created. So now when button subscribe is clicked, we can add an event, data, submit form. This will create a record in subscribers collection. Let's go back to Canvas. I'll scroll down to the form and we'll align text with the second column. So on the grid element, we have 2 blocks inside. Let's go to design properties and set alignment to center. We can now go to the preview and test the form. We'll type my email and hit subscribe. Looks like the form was submitted. We can go back. Let's go to collections, subscribers, and refresh data. Everything seems to work great. You can always select items and export if needed. But for now, let's go back to Canvas and see how our form looks on mobile devices. I'll change the breakpoint to empty screens so we can see that the input looks too small. Let's go on the grid and set columns to 1. I'll adjust the gap to 32 pixels. I'll now check SM screens breakpoint. We'll click on the card and decrease padding to 32. We'll select the text and make it 2XL. And on the form element, we'll set layout direction to vertical. Everything looks good. Can now go back to the all screens. I will collapse all the sections and we'll rename this to newsletter. Let's get to the last section, footer. I'll add a new element, section, with container inside. We'll place block element in the container. We'll also add text element. We'll update the text and set color to gray 500. Now inside the same block, I'll place one more block that we'll use for the links. But first, on the parent block, let's use display flex, align items center, and justify between. So we have text on the left and links on the right. So inside this block, I'll add one more block with icon inside. This will be our single social media link. I will first replace the icon with Twitter X from Remix Icons. In design, we'll update icon size to 16 pixels. And on the block that holds icon, we'll set padding of 10 pixels around. We'll add background color gray, and we'll also set border radius to fully rounded. Let's rename this block to Twitter, and in settings we can add link to custom website and twitter.com. We can set it to open in new tab. Let's now add one more link. I'll duplicate this. We'll rename it to YouTube. We'll change URL to YouTube. Inside, we'll replace the icon and on the block element that has Twitter and YouTube, we'll go into design, we'll set display flex, horizontal, and we'll give a gap of 12 pixels. Next thing you might want to do is to set up hover state for these icons. So on the Twitter element, I'll go into design. The neutral state is by default. I'll select hover and we'll update background color to darker gray. Back to neutral state. So now whenever you hover this element, it will turn into darker gray. We can copy layer style from this and paste it onto YouTube. Or as we did before with the buttons, create layer style. Let's now see how footer looks on different breakpoints. Let's first check MD screens. Looks okay. Let's check SM. Here we might want to adjust direction. So on the block element that is holding text and links, let's now set direction to vertical and I'll give gap of 20 pixels. Back to all screens. I'll now collapse this section, double click to rename it, footer, and in the settings, I'll set tag to footer. Our landing page now looks pretty good. We can now finally get to the animations. Let's first animate hero section. I'll select it. In the right sidebar, you'll find animations. Let's choose a trigger. So there are multiple triggers. You can trigger by element or a page load. In this case, since you open the page, the first thing you will see is hero element. We can trigger this element on a page load. I will add a property, transform, move. We'll move it vertically from 50 pixels to 0. We'll set duration to 1 second and we'll choose easing to ease out. We'll also add opacity, which will go from 0% to 100% in 1 second and ease out. So whenever this page loads, hero section will animate in those two properties. You can now check the preview. Looking good. Let's animate the rest of the sections. Back to canvas. I'll now click content section. We'll exit load trigger and we'll add new trigger. Scroll into view. So whenever this element scrolls into view, we want to do the same effect, move it upwards and fade in. So here are some settings. We will start animating when center of this element will reach 0% of the viewport. 0% is the bottom. It means that whenever section places like this, the center of it at 0% of the viewport, the animation will start. Let's add move property, 50 pixels, duration 1 second, ease out. Same with opacity, from 0 to 100, in 1 second, ease out. Let's preview. Let's now scroll. We can see that section is still not visible. and it starts to appear when the center of it hits the 0% of the viewport. We'll check it again. Looks pretty good. Back to canvas. We'll animate newsletter section now. Let's go out of scroll into view for content. We'll add same properties. Scroll into view. Element center, 0% of viewport. We'll move it 50 pixels to 0. 1 second duration, ease out. Opacity from 0 to 100, 1 second, ease out. Let's do the same for the footer. Center, 50 pixels. Let's now preview. Everything looks great. Let's check SM screen. I hope this video helped you learn Ycode basics. You can find more videos in our YouTube channel. And for this time, thanks for watching and see you in the next one.